The humidity in the Orleans Parish Criminal District Court was not merely atmospheric. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of moisture that clung to the skin and made the air taste of old varnish, sweat, and the brackish scent of the nearby Mississippi River. The air conditioning system, a relic from a decade-long past, had groaned and died 3 hours ago, leaving the packed courtroom to stew in the sweltering Louisiana afternoon. Ceiling fans sliced lazily through the thick air, doing nothing but redistributing the heat, swirling the dust motes that danced in the shafts of harsh sunlight piercing through the high, grime-streaked windows. Every person in the gallery was slick with perspiration, fanning themselves with folded legal pads or crumpled newspapers, the sound creating a low, rhythmic rustling like dry leaves skittering across pavement. But for Leo Rossi, the 22-year-old mechanic sitting at the defendant's table, the heat was irrelevant. He felt a coldness that started in the marrow of his bones and radiated outward, freezing his lungs, making every breath a conscious, agonizing effort. He wore a cheap suit that didn't fit, the sleeves too long, the collar too tight, purchased by his mother from a thrift store 3 days ago. His hands, usually stained with grease and confident when holding a wrench, were now scrubbed raw and trembling violently where they rested on the scarred oak table. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the gallery where his mother was weeping softly into a handkerchief that was already soaked through. He stared fixedly at a gouge in the wood of the table, a jagged scar in the grain, trying to understand how his life, which had been simple and honest, had dissolved into this nightmare. Presiding over this theater of misery was Judge Robert Holloway. Holloway was an institution in New Orleans, a man whose reputation was carved from granite. They called him the Hammer in the press, a jurist who believed that mercy was a flaw in the judicial code, a weakness that allowed chaos to fester. He was a man of sharp angles and sharper intellect, known for his piercing blue eyes that could dissect a lawyer's argument before it was even fully articulated. But today, something was fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong with the architecture of the man. Sitting high upon his bench, elevated above the common fray, Judge Holloway looked less like a titan of justice and more like a man holding onto a cliff edge by his fingernails. His face, usually a mask of impassive judicial authority, was pale, a sickly, waxen sheen of sweat coating his forehead, despite the fact that he had not moved in 20 minutes. He was staring at the papers in front of him, the pre-sentencing report, but his eyes weren't scanning the text. They were vibrating, a subtle, almost imperceptible oscillation that a layman might miss, but which signaled a neurological storm raging beneath the skull. Dr. Arthur Vance sat in the third row of the gallery, an island of stillness in the sea of restless, sweating bodies. While others watched the weeping mother or the terrified defendant, Arthur's eyes were locked on the judge. Arthur was a man who lived in the details that the world ignored. He was a mentalist, a scholar of human behavior, a man who had spent 30 years mapping the intricate, involuntary geography of the human nervous system. To Arthur, the courtroom was not a place of law, but a laboratory of raw, unfiltered human emotion. He saw the truth not in what people said. Words were easy to manipulate, easy to twist, but in the betrayal of their own bodies. The twitch of a lip, the dilation of a pupil, the angle of a foot. The body screams what the mouth refuses to admit. Arthur adjusted his glasses, his gaze narrowing as he focused on Holloway's jugular vein. It was distended, pulsing with an erratic, thumping rhythm that was far too fast for a man sitting still. Tachycardia, Arthur noted mentally, heart rate exceeding 120 beats per minute. Not stress, not heat, terror, primal reptilian terror. The prosecutor, a man named Danton, with a voice like gravel crunching under tires, was wrapping up his closing statement regarding the sentencing recommendation. He was grandstanding, playing to the crowd, wiping sweat from his bald head with a theatrical flourish. "Your Honor," Danton boomed, his voice echoing off the mahogany paneling. Leo Rossi may look like a boy, but his actions were that of a hardened criminal. "The state demands the maximum sentence, 30 years, no parole. We must send a message that law and order still prevails in this city." As Danton spoke, Arthur watched the judge. Holloway didn't nod. He didn't make notes. He flinched. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a fifth of a second. The corrugator superciliary muscles between his eyebrows contracted sharply, pulling together and upward. It wasn't a reaction to the prosecutor's demand for harshness. It was a reaction to the concept of time, 30 years. The judge swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. It was then that Arthur's attention shifted to the anomaly that would unravel the entire tapestry of the afternoon. The judge's bench was high, designed to obscure the lower body of the magistrate, creating a visual barrier between the authority of the court and the subjects before it. But from Arthur's angle, in the third row, through a small gap between the bench and the court reporter's desk, he had a partial view of Judge Holloway's left hand. The hand was not resting on the armrest. It was not clasped with the other. It was hidden beneath the lip of the desk, operating in the shadows. And it was telling a frantic, desperate story. Holloway's fingernails were digging into the soft wood of the desk's underside, digging so hard that the tips were white, devoid of blood. Then, the digging stopped and a rhythm began. The index finger tapped against the wood. Tap, 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 pause, scratch, tap, tap, pause, scratch. It was obsessive, compulsive. It was the motor activity of a brain that was short-circuiting, trying to discharge an overwhelming amount of cortisol and adrenaline. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes sharpening. This wasn't the behavior of a man pondering a judicial decision. This was the behavior of a man who had a gun pressed to his temple, even if the gun was invisible. It is in these moments, when we observe the cracks in the facade of authority, that we realize how fragile the structures of our society truly are. We assume that those empowered judges, doctors, leaders, are immune to the base fears that plague the rest of us. But fear is the great equalizer. It strips away the robes, the titles, and the accolades, leaving only the shivering animal beneath. If you're finding yourself drawn into this web of hidden signals and silent screams, if you want to learn how to see the truth that lies beneath the surface of daily life, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your support allows us to continue peeling back the layers of human behavior and telling the stories that no one else dares to tell. Now, back to the suffocating heat of the courtroom. "Mr. Rossi," Judge Holloway's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, a harsh, wet sound, and tried again. "Mr. Rossi, please stand." Leo stood up. His legs were like water. He gripped the table to keep from collapsing. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the impending doom of a young life about to be extinguished. "I have reviewed the evidence," Holloway said. His voice was flat, robotic. It lacked the usual baritone resonance that commanded respect. It sounded hollow, as if he were reading a script he had never seen before. "And I have heard the pleas of the prosecution." Arthur watched the judge's eyes. They were darting, left, right, center, down, left, right. It was a classic scanning pattern of someone looking for an escape route, or looking for a threat. Holloway wasn't looking at the defendant. He wasn't looking at the jury. He was scanning the back of the courtroom. Arthur turned his head slowly, casually, mimicking a stretch, and followed the judge's line of sight. The courtroom was packed, a sea of faces ranging from bored to angry to sorrowful. But Arthur's training allowed him to filter out the noise. He looked for the anomaly. He looked for the stillness in the chaos. And he found it. In the very last row, near the heavy double doors that led to the corridor, sat a man who didn't belong. In a room where the temperature was pushing 95 degrees, where men had stripped off their jackets and rolled up their sleeves. This man was wearing a heavy, charcoal grey trench coat. He sat perfectly still. He wasn't fanning himself. He wasn't wiping sweat from his brow. He was a statue. Arthur narrowed his eyes. The man was wearing sunglasses indoors, dark, aviator-style glasses that completely obscured his eyes. But it was his posture that screamed danger. He was angled slightly toward the bench, his body rigid, his right hand buried deep inside the pocket of the heavy coat. He wasn't watching the defendant. He was locked onto the judge. Arthur looked back at Holloway. The tapping under the desk had increased in tempo. Tap, tap, taps, cratch, tap, tap, scratch. A realization hit Arthur with the force of a physical blow. The rhythm, it wasn't random, it was a pattern. 3 quick taps, 1 long scratch, 3 quick taps, 1 long scratch, 3 dots, 1 dash. In Morse code, 3 dots is S, 1 dash is T. Stort Street, it didn't make sense. Street, sort, stop, sorter, stop. Arthur's mind raced, flipping through his encyclopedic knowledge of non-verbal communication and codes. Maybe it wasn't Morse, maybe it was simply a counting mechanism, or maybe it was a somatic bridger physical action used to ground the mind when it is dissociating from reality due to extreme trauma. The judge began to speak again, his words rushing out now, as if he wanted to vomit them up and be done with it. The court finds that the severity of the crime, the brutal nature of the assault, requires a sentence that reflects the community's outrage. Leo Rossi began to sob. It was a quiet, broken sound. "I didn't do it," he whispered. "Please, Judge, I was at the garage, I swear." Holloway flinched again. This time, his left eye twitched violently. He looked directly at the man in the trench coat at the back of the room. The man in the coat didn't move, but Arthur saw a subtle shift in his jawline, a clench, a signal. The judge looked back at his papers, his hands shaking so badly now that the papers rattled against the wood. I am prepared to pass sentence." Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline. The pieces were clicking together, the heat, the coat, the hand in the pocket, the judge's terror, the specific rhythm of the tapping. It wasn't street. Arthur closed his eyes for a split second, visualizing the judge's finger. The scratch wasn't a dash. It was a drag, a pull, tap, 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 pull. It was the rhythm of a man trying to claw his way out of a box. Judge Holloway is a man of the law, Arthur thought. He believes in structure. He believes in rules. When a man like that breaks, he doesn't break randomly. He breaks according to a logic we can't see yet. Arthur looked at the judge's pupils again. They were pinpricks. Miosis, usually caused by opiates or intense focused light. But there was no bright light shining in the judge's face. Then Arthur realized it wasn't the light from outside. It was the tunnel vision of a survival response. The judge was focusing so hard on one specific outcome that his biology was shutting down his peripheral vision. He was in a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel was the safety of of someone, his family. The thought materialized in Arthur's mind with absolute certainty. Judges are threatened all the time. They have security details, they have panic buttons. Holloway wasn't afraid for himself. A man like Holloway would face a bullet with dignity. But a man who is shaking, who is vomiting words he doesn't believe, who is betraying his own sacred oath, that is a man who is being leveraged with something more precious than his own life. "The defendant will rise," Holloway commanded, his voice cracking into a falsetto before dropping back down. Leo Rossi stood, his knees knocking together. "In the matter of the state versus Leo Rossi," Holloway said, sweat dripping from his nose onto the legal pad. "I sentence you to... Arthur saw the judge's hand under the desk spasm. It clenched into a fist, the knuckles white, the fingernails biting into the palm so hard that Arthur knew, with metaphysical certainty, that he was drawing blood. The pain was a focal point. He was using the pain to keep from screaming. The man in the back row shifted. His hand moved slightly inside the coat pocket. It was a thumb movement, a toggle, a detonator, a phone. Arthur's brain processed the variables at lightning speed. If it was a bomb in the courtroom, the man wouldn't be sitting there. Suicide bombers are rare in organized crime or blackmail scenarios. They prefer remote leverage. The coat was too heavy for the weather-likely concealing body armor or a weapon, but the hand in the pocket suggested a remote trigger. "I sentence you to... double quotes." Holloway paused. He couldn't say it. He physically couldn't get the words out. He was fighting a war inside his own larynx. The silence stretched, becoming agonizing. The court reporter stopped typing, looking up with confusion. The bailiff frowned, his hand drifting lazily toward his belt, sensing the tension but not understanding the source. "Say it," the prosecutor whispered, audible only to the front row, impatient for his victory. Holloway took a breath that sounded like a drowning man surfacing. "To 30 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary, without the possibility of... stop." Arthur didn't say the word. He thought it, but his body was already moving. He was calculating the distance to the aisle, the distance to the bench, the line of sight of the man in the back. He noticed something else about the judge's hand. The tapping had stopped. Now, the judge was doing something even more peculiar. He was rubbing the wedding band on his left ring finger, rubbing it furiously with his thumb, round and round and round. Holloway was a widower. His wife had died 5 years ago. Arthur remembered reading the obituary. It had been a big story in the local papers. Why was he wearing the ring? And why was he signaling it? He wasn't signaling the wife. He was signaling the child. The ring was a symbol of the family unit. Holloway had a daughter, a young woman, maybe 20, a student at Tulane University. Arthur recalled seeing a photo of her on the judge's desk in a magazine profile years ago. The judge was telling anyone who could see, anyone who could read the language of the desperate, "They have my family." Arthur looked at the innocent boy, Leo Rossi, whose life was seconds away from being obliterated because of a leverage play he knew nothing about. Leo was just a pawn, a piece of meat being fed to the grinder to satisfy the demands of the man in the coat. The injustice of it burned in Arthur's chest. It wasn't just about the law, it was about the violation of the soul. To force a father to destroy an innocent man to save his own child, it was a cruelty so precise, so mathematical, that it required a response that was equally precise. The judge opened his mouth to finish the sentence. Parole. The gavel began to rise. Arthur Vance stood up. The movement was smooth, fluid, and commanded immediate attention in the stagnant room. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He simply rose with the authority of a man who knows he is the only awake person in a room full of sleepwalkers. "Your Honor." Arthur's voice cut through the humid air like a scalpel. It was calm, resonant, projected from the diaphragm. "I object." The courtroom froze. This was not a procedural objection from a lawyer. This was an interruption from the gallery, a cardinal sin in the sanctuary of the court. Judge Holloway froze, the gavel hovering in mid-air. His eyes snapped to Arthur. For a second, there was confusion, then recognition. Holloway knew who Arthur was. He had seen him consult on jury selection years ago. "Sit down," the bailiff barked, stepping forward, his hand resting on his taser. "Sir, sit down, or you will be removed." Arthur ignored the bailiff. He kept his eyes locked on Holloway's. He raised his own hands, palms open, showing he was unarmed, showing he was calm. "Look at your hands, Robert." Arthur said, using the judge's first name. "A shocking breach of protocol. Look at what your hands are doing." The man in the back row stiffened. His head turned slightly toward Arthur. "You are tapping a 3-to-1 rhythm," Arthur continued, his voice steady, walking slowly toward the railing that separated the gallery from the court. "And you are rubbing a ring that belongs to a marriage that ended 5 years ago. You aren't passing a sentence, Your Honor. You are paying a ransom." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor's jaw dropped. Leo Rossi looked up, confusion warring with hope in his tear-filled eyes. "Bailiff, arrest that man." "Danton," the prosecutor shouted, pointing at Arthur. "If you arrest me," Arthur said, not breaking eye contact with the judge, "you seal the fate of the innocent." "Look at his pupils, Danton. Look at the sweat. This is not heatstroke. This is a hostage situation." Arthur turned, slowly, deliberately, to face the back of the room. He raised a finger and pointed directly at the man in the charcoal coat. "And the man holding the leash," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register, "is sitting right there, wearing a winter coat in a sauna, with his hand on a trigger." The man in the coat stood up. The sunglasses reflected the stagnant light of the courtroom. The air suddenly felt charged with electricity, the static before the lightning strike. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with violence. The silence that followed Arthur's accusation was not empty. It was heavy, a physical mass that pressed against the eardrums of every soul in the Orleans Parish Criminal District Court. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion, the split second between the pulling of a pin and the detonation of a grenade. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to suspend itself in amber. The dust motes stopped dancing in the shafts of light. The ceiling fans seemed to slow their rhythmic churning, and the breath of 200 people was held in a collective, terrified stasis. The man in the charcoal trench coat stood by the double doors, a dark monolith against the peeling cream paint of the courtroom walls. He did not run. He did not panic. Instead, a slow, reptilian smile spread across his face, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect, a porcelain veneer over a soul that had long since rotted away. His hand remained buried deep in the right pocket of his heavy coat, the fabric straining against the shape of something rigid and rectangular. "Lock the doors," Arthur roared, his voice shattering the paralysis. "Officer, do not let him leave, but do not approach him. He has a dead man's switch." The bailiff, a burly man named Miller, who had spent 20 years dealing with petty thieves and drunk drivers, hesitated. His hand hovered over his sidearm, his eyes darting between the judge, the frantic mentalist in the gallery, and the ominous figure in the back. The confusion was a weapon, and the man in the coat knew how to wield it. "Smart man," the stranger said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with a faint, unplaceable accent that smelled of old money and new cruelty. "Very smart man. Listen to him, Officer Miller. If my thumb leaves this button, or if my heart rate drops to 0, a signal goes out. And when that signal goes out, Judge Holloway's beautiful daughter, Emily, who is currently tied to a chair in a warehouse in the 9th Ward, will cease to exist." A strangled cry ripped from Judge Holloway's throat. It was a sound of pure, animalistic despair, the sound of a wolf caught in a trap, gnawing off its own leg. He slumped forward over the bench, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with violent, silent sobs. The gavel, the symbol of his authority, rolled off the desk and clattered onto the floor with a hollow, mocking thud. The courtroom erupted. Screams, gasps, the scraping of chairs as people scrambled away from the aisle, pressing themselves against the far walls. But Arthur Vance did not move away. He moved closer. He stepped over the wooden railing that separated the spectators from the court, entering the arena. "Everyone stay calm," Arthur commanded, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, authoritative timbre. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was projecting calm, using a technique known as command tonality, bypassing the panic centers of the brain and speaking directly to the compliance reflex. "Officer Miller, keep your weapon drawn, but do not aim at his head. Center mass. We need him alive and conscious. Prosecutor Dantang, get down. Leo, get under the table." Leo Rossi, the young mechanic who had been seconds away from a life sentence, looked at Arthur with wide, terrified eyes. He didn't understand the geopolitics of the room, but he understood survival. He scrambled under the heavy oak defense table, curling into a ball. Arthur turned his body slowly to face the man in the coat. He stood in the middle of the aisle, a solitary figure in a tweed suit facing a monster in a trench coat. The distance between them was 30 feet, but the psychological distance was 0. They were locked in a duel of minds. "You aren't the architect of this," Arthur said softly, taking a tentative step forward. He held his hands out, palms up, fingers spread. "You're the mechanic. The architect wouldn't be here. The architect would be watching on a secure feed from a yacht in the Gulf. You're the hired help." The man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of irritation. Arthur caught it. He filed it away. Ego. He has an ego. He doesn't like being called a subordinate. "I am the one holding the detonator, old man," the stranger spat, his composure cracking slightly. "That makes me God in this room." "No," Arthur corrected him gently, taking another step. "It makes you a target. Look at yourself. You're wearing a wool blend coat in 90-degree heat. You're sweating, but not from the temperature. I can smell the pheromones from here. Acrid, sharp. That's cortisol. You're terrified. You didn't expect anyone to see the judge's signal. You thought this would be a clean transaction. Judge says the words, you walk out, you get paid. But now it's messy." Arthur's eyes were scanning the man with the precision of an MRI machine. He noticed the slight tremor in the man's left leg, the quadriceps muscle twitching involuntarily. He saw the way the man's tongue darted out to wet his dry lips. He saw the pulse point in the man's neck fluttering like a trapped moth. "Stop walking," the man screamed, pulling a black device halfway out of his pocket. It was a modified radio transmitter with a red button depressed under his thumb. "One more step and I release it." Arthur stopped. He stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed, his breathing deep and rhythmic. He was modeling the behavior he wanted the gunman to mirror. If Arthur panicked, the gunman would panic. If Arthur remained a statue of tranquility, the gunman's mirror neurons would subconsciously try to match that state. "I'm stopped," Arthur said. "But time isn't. Every second you stand there, the police are surrounding this building. SWAT is already deploying. You know this. You're a professional. You know the perimeter is being sealed. Your exit strategy is gone. The van waiting for you in the alley. It's blocked." The man's eyes darted to the exit sign above the door. A tell. He was thinking about escape. He wasn't a suicide soldier. He wanted to live, to spend the money. "Judge Holloway," Arthur called out, never taking his eyes off the gunman. "I need you to focus. I know you are in hell right now, but I need you to tell me exactly what the message said, the one they sent you this morning." Holloway raised his head. His face was a ruin of tears and snot, his judicial dignity stripped away to reveal the terrified father beneath. They sent a video," he choked out. "Emily. She was reading a newspaper from today. They said, if Leo Rossi walks, she dies. If I hesitate, she dies. If I tell anyone, she dies." "And the tapping?" Arthur asked. "The rhythm you were beating on the desk. It was a song," Holloway sobbed. "A lullaby. Mockingbird. I used to sing it to her when she was a baby. I didn't even know I was doing it. I was just ... I was praying to her." Arthur nodded. It wasn't a code. It was a subconscious anchor. The mind, under extreme duress, regresses to moments of safety and love. The judge was mentally holding his daughter, while his physical body was being forced to destroy an innocent man. "Listen to me," Arthur said to the gunman. "The police are listening right now. We can negotiate, but you have to know something. The man who hired you, the one who wants Leo Rossi in prison, he's not going to pay you." The gunman laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You don't know who I work for. I don't need to know his name to know his nature," Arthur replied, his voice taking on a surgical precision. "He hired you to coerce a judge in open court. That is a high-risk operation, high exposure. Loose ends are dangerous. You are a loose end. Think about it. Why did he make you come here? Why didn't he just have you watch the live stream? He wanted you here so that if things went wrong, you would be the one caught. You are the fall guy. You are the sacrifice." The gunman's brow furrowed. "Doubt. It's a seed. If planted correctly, it grows faster than bamboo." Arthur saw the hesitation in the man's eyes. The certainty was eroding. "You're lying," the gunman muttered, but the conviction was gone. Arthur pressed. "Check your phone. The burner phone in your other pocket. I bet you haven't received the all-clear signal you were expecting 5 minutes ago, have you? The transfer hasn't hit your offshore account yet, has it?" It was a gamble. A massive, reckless gamble. Arthur had no idea if there was a transfer or a signal, but he knew criminal psychology. There is always a delay. There is always paranoia. The gunman's left hand twitched toward his inner jacket pocket, then stopped. He couldn't check, not without letting go of the detonator or losing his aim. He was trapped in a cognitive loop. "Check it," Arthur goaded him. "Or are you afraid I'm right? Are you afraid that while you're standing here sweating, your boss is already on a plane, leaving you to rot in Angola State Prison?" The gunman's breathing became shallow. Hyperventilation was setting in. This was the danger zone. A hypoxic brain makes irrational decisions. Arthur needed to stabilize him, then break him. "Officer Miller," Arthur said calmly, "lower your weapon slightly. Show him we aren't going to shoot. Are you crazy?" Miller hissed, sweat dripping into his eyes. "Do it," Arthur commanded. "He needs to feel a reduction in immediate threat so his frontal cortex can come back online. Right now, he's all amygdala. He's all fight or flight." Miller hesitated, then lowered the barrel of his .45 by a few inches. "There," Arthur said to the gunman, "we are de-escalating. We are talking. I can help you. I can get you a deal, but only if Emily Holloway is found alive in the next 10 minutes. After that, you are a cop killer and a child murderer, and there is no deal on earth that saves you from the needle." The gunman looked at the judge, then at Arthur. He looked at the heavy doors behind him. He was breaking. I can't," the gunman whispered. "If I don't send the confirmation code in 5 minutes, they kill her anyway. It's a fail-safe." "Give me the code," Arthur said. He took another step. He was now 10 feet away. He could smell the man's fear, a scent like copper and sour milk. "Give me the code, and we send it. We trick 'em. We buy time. It's not that simple," the gunman screamed, waving the detonator. "They are watching the news, they know." Suddenly, the double doors of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't the SWAT team. It wasn't the police. It was a woman. An elderly woman with a walker, confused, holding a subpoena, stumbling into the wrong courtroom at the worst possible moment. The distraction was absolute. The gunman flinched, turning his head toward the noise. His thumb slipped on the button. "No," Holloway screamed, lunging over the bench with a desperation that defied his age. Arthur didn't scream. He moved, exploiting the quarter second of distraction. Arthur closed the 10-foot gap with the speed of a striking cobra. He didn't go for the weapon. He didn't go for the man's face. He went for the hand holding the detonator. Arthur's hand clamped over the gunman's hand, his fingers interlacing, locking the gunman's thumb down onto the button. He wasn't trying to pull it away. He was forcing the connection to stay closed. "I have it," Arthur grunted, the physical strain evident as the gunman thrashed, slamming Arthur against the wall. "I'm holding the circuit closed. Miller, now." Officer Miller didn't hesitate this time. He holstered his weapon and tackled the gunman, driving his shoulder into the man's solar plexus. The three of them went down in a heap of limbs and fabric. "Don't let go," Arthur yelled, his face pressed against the dirty floor tiles, his hand crushing the gunman's hand, keeping that deadly button depressed. "If this button lifts, the girl dies." The gunman was gasping for air, incapacitated by the blow, but Arthur refused to release his grip. He was the human safety pin. "Get the tech unit in here," Miller shouted into his radio. "I need a signal jammer. Now, we have a live trigger." The next 10 minutes were an eternity of agonizing tension. The courtroom was evacuated, leaving only Arthur, the pinned gunman, Officer Miller, and the sobbing Judge Holloway. Arthur lay on the floor, his muscles burning, his focus absolute, holding the hand of a killer as if they were lovers. "Where is she?" Arthur whispered into the gunman's ear. "It's over. Give us the location. Redeem your soul." The gunman, defeated, wheezing, whispered an address: 1400 Chartres Street, Warehouse 4, blue container. Holloway heard it. He grabbed the bailiff's radio. "Dispatch, 1400 Chartres. Go now. My daughter is there." Arthur didn't let go. He couldn't. Not until he knew. Minutes ticked by. The heat in the room was unbearable. Sweat pooled around them on the floor. Arthur's hand was cramping, spasms shooting up his arm, but he visualized his hand turning to stone. He locked his mind into a meditative state, ignoring the pain, ignoring the fatigue. Finally the radio crackled, static, then a voice. A beautiful, chaotic, heavenly voice. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We have the hostage. She is alive. I repeat, Emily Holloway is secure. Suspects in custody." The sound that came out of Judge Holloway was not human. It was the sound of a soul returning to a body. He collapsed onto the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Only then did Arthur Vance open his fingers. He released the gunman's hand. The button clicked up. The red light on the device turned green. The signal was sent, but there was no one left at the other end to receive it. The bomb, or the executioner, had been neutralized. Arthur rolled onto his back, staring up at the spinning ceiling fan. His chest heaved. His suit was ruined. His glasses were askew, but his mind was clear. The aftermath was a blur of activity. SWAT teams swarming, paramedics checking vitals, reporters clamoring at the barricades outside. But amidst the chaos, there was a quiet moment of profound humanity. Leo Rossi, the boy who had been invisible, walked over to where Arthur was sitting on a bench in the hallway, being checked by a medic. Leo didn't say anything at first. He just reached out and took Arthur's hand, the same hand that had held the detonator, and shook it. "You saw me," Leo said, his voice trembling, "when everyone else saw a criminal, and the judge saw a pawn. You saw me. You saved my life." Arthur smiled, a tired, gentle smile. "I didn't just see you, Leo. I saw the truth. The truth is always there, screaming to be heard. Most people just don't know how to listen." Judge Holloway emerged from the courtroom, supported by 2 officers. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning, but his eyes were clear. He walked straight to Arthur. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about protocol. He fell to his knees in front of the Mentalist. "You read my terror," Holloway whispered, gripping Arthur's arms. "You read the fear of a father when I couldn't speak it. You're the only reason I am not a murderer today. You are the only reason my daughter is breathing." Arthur placed a hand on the judge's shoulder. "Justice isn't about statutes, Robert. It's about seeing. It's about realizing that behind every gavel, every verdict, every crime, there is a human heart beating in terror or in hope. Today, we just happened to hear the beat a little louder than usual. The charges against Leo Rossi were dismissed with prejudice immediately. The investigation revealed that the witness against him had been bribed by the same syndicate that kidnapped Emily. The corruption ran deep, but the cleansing fire of that day burned it out. As Arthur walked out of the courthouse into the blinding Louisiana sun, he put his sunglasses on. The humidity was still there, wrapping around him like a heavy blanket, but the air tasted different now. It didn't taste of varnish and old sweat. It tasted of redemption. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at the inscription above the courthouse pillars. Justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. No, Arthur murmured to himself, justice is just observation. It's paying attention when the rest of the world is asleep. We often walk through life with our eyes wide open, but our minds shut tight. We see the surface, the souk, the smile, the nod, but we miss the tremor in the hand, the dilation of the pupil, the silent scream for help. We judge based on appearances, condemning the innocent and praising the guilty, simply because we haven't learned to look deeper. The story of Judge Holloway and Leo Rossi is a reminder that reality is not what is presented to us. Reality is what leaks out through the cracks. It teaches us that sometimes the greatest act of heroism isn't firing a gun or throwing a punch. It's simply noticing that someone is tapping a rhythm of distress on a wooden desk. It reminds us that we are all connected, all vulnerable, and that our salvation often lies in the hands of a stranger who cares enough to watch. If this story made your heart race, if it made you look at your own hands and wonder what secrets they are betraying, then please leave a comment below. Tell us about a time you noticed something everyone else missed. Share this video with someone who needs to know that the truth is always visible to those who know where to look. And don't forget to subscribe, because in a world full of illusions, we are here to show you the reality. Until next time, keep watching, keep observing, because the next story might be happening right in front of you.